So our next speaker is Niklas Anzinger. He's going to be talking about new cities, network states, and technology. So give a huge round of applause for Niklas, everybody. Enjoy.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Can everyone hear me? The back? Perfect. Cool. Yeah, so has anyone heard of the network state? Just the word, the phrase? Hands up. It's not that many. Everyone else hasn't heard about it? Right? Balaji Srinivasan? Right? Have you actually read the book or just listened to? Oh, someone's read the book? Oh, wow, cool. So an educated audience here. So yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about network states, new cities. Right? So one of my messages will be there's already new city developments that are kind of from this space, and also how this can accelerate a new wave of technological progress. Why do I care about that? I have a VC fund. I started it inspired by my experience being a resident in Prospera. Has anyone heard of Prospera in this room? Yeah, charter city, special economic zone on Roatan, beautiful Caribbean island. That's part of the country of Honduras. I'm a resident there. I lived there 4 to 6 months in a year. And it inspired me to do this VC fund because what I'm going to talk about today is something great that's in the making that's happening. I'm also a resident of Suzalu. Does anyone know about Suzalu? Vitalik's pop-up city in Montenegro, 2 months long network state-like experiment. Also super cool. And I also organize a couple of events. I'm going to do a refi event on Zanzibar in Tanzania in 2 weeks. So there's direct flights from Paris. If you're going to ECC, you can fly directly over there. I also organized a conference, New Cities and Network States, which was the first of its kind. And I have a really cool podcast called the Stranded Technologies Podcast. So my first message is, so many people who read Balaji's book, they're like, oh, this is kind of confusing and sort of very futuristic and way far into the future. And my first message is, it already exists, right? So, and not that many people know about this. This is already kind of a bigger thing or a bigger trend, right? But there is real city developments, right? So Honduras is a pioneer. There are some places in Africa, especially Nigeria and Zanzibar with 2 developments. So there is a couple of developments happening with real physical space, with real estate development. Also, what I call network states here is kind of a community-first approach to start new developments like that. So Afropolitan and Praxis especially have been innovating a lot there. And also in the co-living sites, a previous speaker mentioned Cabin or Cohere. These are also like tokenizing, owning land and real estate together. So to me, they fall in the same space. Cabin calls itself a network city, right? And there's a bunch of infrastructure around and a bunch of organization. So I could give a much longer talk talking about all of those, really fascinating stuff happening. But I'm here mainly to talk about the thing that I love the most, which is technology. Right? So why do I care so much about these new developments? Because I think they can accelerate technology. Right? So there's this quip by a notorious billionaire who said they promised us flying cars and all we got was 140 characters. So I studied this for a couple of years and I have a background in economics and I couldn't believe it at first, but there's something to that, right? Sort of in a slightly wonky depiction of it is this chart, which talks about total factor productivity. It's basically the rate of productive economic growth, right? So we've been growing a lot until like the 70s and then we were kind of stagnating or flatlining. There's a website called WTF, happened in 1971, which has hundreds of indicators showing that there's a worrisome trend happening, right? And there's innovation in the world of bits. That's great. Like we got software, we got the personal computer, we got Web3 and crypto, but it's not happening in the world of atoms. Right? And one example that makes this apparent to me is cities, right? So San Francisco, LA, housing prices in many parts of the world, like what we heard from the speaker before, that's a common trend. And that's not good, right? Also, airports increasingly. I've been a nomad for 3 years, and I feel like airports are increasingly getting a worse product, more expensive, more taxes, more bureaucracy going through. So there's something happening. And I spend tons of time on my podcasts researching what's going on. I have a background myself as an entrepreneur. I talk to hundreds of entrepreneurs, regulators, policymakers, economists. And I think there's a real problem in the way we do regulation. right? Our regulatory paradigm. In healthcare and biotech, there's something called Eroom's law, which is the reverse of Moore's law, right? So if Moore's law increased our computing power every 2 years, or doubled computing power every 2 years, Moore's law does the opposite for new drug development. Literally the opposite happened in new drug development. Despite Moore's law, despite computational biology, it costs now hundreds of millions and takes 10 to 15 years to bring new drugs to market, right? It's been happening over decades. If you're in crypto, you know about the SEC, you might have heard about Gary Gensler, the Howey test. Why are we talking about like laws from the 1930s that regulate a new technology? Why are we talking about like this orange trade that is supposed to regulate what we want to do in this space? Right? I think we'd be already much, much further, especially when it comes to like tokenization of real-world assets, if it wasn't for these bottlenecks, right? Who updates them? So the idea is, like it always is in technology or in much of progress of human history, where are the frontiers? Right? So it used to be the American West, for example, or we're looking for new industries like crypto, technologies that are born free, software, they were unencumbered by anything. So where is that? Where can we go? Right? So the network state is that idea that's out there basically to encapsulate the intent to exit. And exit is not full exit, right? So you can also do a digital exit. You just want a place where you have permissionlessness, right? And we have a place right now, we have a 0 to 1, where that permissionlessness extends into the real world. I'm a very proud resident of that space. And again, it catalyzed my bigger vision that now there's something we can do about all these things, right? So, and many of the other projects, they're also pushing the boundaries in other areas. Prospera is really the most advanced one of its kind. So this is why I'm very bullish on it and spend most of my time there. And Prospera has, I think, the winning idea to solve the regulatory problem. And the idea is called polycentric common law. There's a fantastic podcast episode with Tom W. Bell, who literally developed an open source legal code, right? So he collected the best legal practices from hundreds of years and put them in a file, literally on GitHub. Right? So if you have a new network state project, if you want to build kind of a new society, you can use that legal code and fork it and adapt it to your local needs, to your local culture and everything like that, which I think is an absolutely brilliant idea. And the core idea to it is flexibility, right? So you're not forced by your regulator or your government, you have to, you know, you're under jurisdiction, you have this, but instead you have flexibility. It's something I could talk about for hours. But the idea is, and what's great about it, is it's flexible for business, right? So as a business, you're not under this one FDA. Instead, you can choose what regulations you're under. There's a great company called MiniCircle that is doing clinical trials in Prospera, right? And they're not doing anything much different. They're still doing safety trials. They just can cut tons of bureaucracy by just saying, oh, we don't need all this documentation beforehand. That's redundant. Right? Or Aerial Loop, a drone logistics company. Did you know that Zipline, the biggest drone company in the world, I think valued at several billion, they didn't start commercial flights in the United States. They started them in Rwanda, which is kind of crazy, right? Because the aviation regulations in the United States treat drones like airlines, which is insane for a small startup. You just can't do that and fulfill all these requirements. So now with Prospera, Aerial Loop has a base to do what Zipline has done in Rwanda. Similar cases, circular factories, super fast building permits to build like really funky futuristic housing, like this in the background. Or Seshat Bank, right? So the financial system is getting more centralized because of regulation, right? It's not preventing it, it's centralizing it even more, right? So after the financial crisis, the approval for new bank charter decreased by 98%, which means there's fewer big banks, which is part of what Balaji calls the fiat crisis right now. So in Prospera, we have a new bank chartered, just like that. So why do I care about this? So what's the ultimate goal of it? I think with these places, with Prospera, with network states, with new cities, we're experimenting in finding a better economic model. Right, so a model that can give us 5% productive economic growth instead of 2. Right, so 2 is what we got in the best years. Probably not right now, but we got it in the best years. That's what got us to where we are now. if we get back to 2%, we would 7.5x humanity in 100 years, which is great, but I don't think it's enough to solve like extreme poverty and allow us to build like an extraplanetary, a multiplanetary species. If we can get that to 5%, we're going to 130x humanity. That would allow us to solve extreme poverty. That would allow us to solve housing. That would make us a multiplanetary species. That would be a new civilizational superabundance. Right, so just looking at time, because I can get very excited about these things. Oh, I'm actually have a lot of time. So there's a couple of levers where I think that we can test in these new developments in cities to reach this 5%. And they're actually not that funky, right? They're actually very commonsensical. We just need to do what we already know works. So we know in crypto we can build a new financial system, right? I mean, many of us are probably already building these tools, right? The problem really just is that the banks are fighting back, right? And they don't want that, right? Because they think they're threatened. Tokyo has deregulated housing in the early 2000s. It has since not increased in rent and in land prices. It's like one of the only or major city in the world, right, where everywhere else that increased. Tokyo is just building, right? It's just much easier to build new housing. Education, also a very big topic, right? So I think we're doing a lot wrong when it comes to education in ways that I could talk for hours about. What I mentioned in medical, right? So there's different degrees of freedom, how we could improve, and I'm happy to talk about all of them, but some are very commonsensical. Also, I think nuclear energy would be a clean source of energy or of power that would allow us to, well, improve the climate, right? And to also develop all sorts of other industrial technology that we can need, for example, to desalinate water. So we can have like clean water much more accessible all over the world, right? Also, I think labor mobility is one of the biggest problems in the world, right? So I think it's the biggest injustice in the world that's going on today, or the biggest driver for inequality, is the passport you're born with, right? So it explains by far the most, and it's a major injustice. And my hope is that in this space, we can create a more open world, where it's easier if you're born in a country where there's not much opportunity to go somewhere else where you can upgrade and upskill your life. Right, there's also some really cool and funky stuff that I don't know yet if it can work, but my friend in longevity biotech tell me we could live hundreds of years. Awesome, let's try it. Right now in the FDA, we're doing it way too slow. Or nanotechnology, right? So we can have like these miniature nanoscale robots that could engineer the material world. Synthetic biology probably as well. Coupled with AI, we could literally have robots build our housing, right? So energy too cheap to meter and just a much more open world. You know, one of my favorite economists, Brian Kaplan, estimated if we had open borders, we would double world GDP, right? So something specific to this conference that I wanted to mention, because I would otherwise probably ask the question, what opportunities are there for crypto, for Web3? Just to list a couple where these new developments can help us accelerate, right? So one is easy, sound money, right? So, you know, once you have your money in crypto, governments can't abuse it to fight wars, and they can't take it away from you or seize it, you know, unless that's under explicit smart contracts that you agreed with before. Same for wealth protection, right? So, you know, you're gonna have a real social contract, and, you know, you can sue that government or whatever, and, you know, this obeys the rules of the smart social contract, right? Public goods funding, right? So I think a lot of the barriers, for example, for crowdfunding, you know, accredited investor rules in the United States, not sure in Europe you're that familiar with it, but it makes a lot of public goods funding harder, right? It makes it harder for people who are not very wealthy to participate in like communal efforts to do public goods. Also, property rights in 3D are pretty cool, so you can tokenize the air, right, and have a market for like drones, right? So where can they fly, where can they not fly, or for viewpoints, right? So you want to get together as a community and sort of protect this airspace and its views. Same for like nature protection, right? That's the place. This is exactly where we can tokenize sort of access to land. You can have an auditable public treasury. Doesn't yet exist to my knowledge, but it would be great. I made an X when it already exists, right? I can point examples. I didn't make an X when it doesn't exist yet. At Zuzalu, we experimented with zero-knowledge technology for identity verification. Also super cool. What if in the future, your passports could be created through, zero-knowledge technology, which is much more, privacy ensuring. And then, lastly, just hyper-liquidity, hyper-tokenization of everything. Like the bottleneck right now is simply registers, right? Land registries for property and securities laws around that and what you can trade and what you can't trade. So, yeah, this is just a summary of, this is just the beginning or the surface of why I'm really excited about this space. And it's really nascent, right? The first conference in that space, the New Cities and Network States conference, was just like 2 months ago in Zuzalu, right? And it's inspired by this space, right? By, Ethereum is in a way a network state, and Zuzalu is kind of Vitalik's first experiment to, well, let's see what happens if we get together in the real world and do things. So that's super, super encouraging, and I think a real inflection point. So I think for any builder, there is ample opportunity to join and see which projects excite you. They all have different focuses, right? Some are more libertarian, some are more progressive, more funding public goods. So I want this space to have loads of different flavors, and we try out loads of different things and how we can improve governance. Right, so here you can find me or connect with me. Something that I didn't include here, I'm doing a little meetup on Saturday. One of the co-founders of Prospera is actually here. So on Saturday, we can talk more things Prospera, which is really, really exciting. It's something, again, could talk about for hours. So go on that thing and then click on events. And then I think it's the first event on Saturday. Hope to see you there. I think we still have 3 minutes for questions. Thank you.
Yeah, my question is that as bureaucratic as regulation may be sometimes and ineffective, it's also there to protect against existential risk, externalities, exploitation. And by privatizing ownership to billionaires of like exponential technologies, do you not see that as like quite dangerous and like potential to actually accelerate risks and the climate crisis and artificial intelligence risk, bio kind of engineering, all this kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Seems quite scary to me.
To me, the exact opposite is scary, right? So when you look at any material existing existential risk, like bioweapons, like nuclear power, like weapons of mass destruction, like gas, everything has one thing in common. They've been used for military purposes by governments, right? So do we want to give governments the power to regulate these technologies instead of, having them open source? Right, where you can actually build checks and balances, right? It's not few centralized actors that have access to dangerous technology or the power. Instead, we can build open source security protocols against these things. I think that would be a much more safer world.
Why would it be open source if it's VC owned? If it's VC and private owned, it's not necessarily open source. You could just be replicating the same extractive models, but worse. That's the risk, right?
Well, I would say open source is good, right? The more
open source is
the
great,
better.
yeah, but there's no guarantee that it's open source, right?
No, there's not guarantee, but we've seen in software and we've seen in crypto and Web3, the first thing that builders in that space gravitate towards is making a lot of things available open source. And it did so without regulations to tell them to do so, right?
But now look what's happened to crypto now.
For what are the reasons?
Yeah, appreciate the talk. Love the network state energy. I'm curious about this lens around GDP growth going to 5%. If this happens in an extractive economy, we lose access to clean air, our topsoil, biodiversity, and clean water at an increased rate, where the science already shows we're going to hit tens of millions of deaths per summer, per year by 2035. So what are we looking at if we keep increasing the rate of extraction in this current economic system if we don't solve the underlying problem of how we treat the planet?
Yeah, again, I think almost the entire opposite is true, right? So it's because of governments that outregulated things like nuclear power, very cheap and clean energy, that we are much less close to combating climate change than we are. I think it's also due to one of the biggest sources of emissions in the world is fossil fuel subsidies by governments. Mainly coming from Egypt, from Indonesia, from China, from India. These are one of the biggest sources, and I think we can do much better again if the market is much more liquid, and especially if it's growing. because we've also seen as populations get more wealthy, we care more about the environment. We have more resources to protect the environment, and we have more people that can labor on protecting the environment. Got time for one more question, or? Yeah, time is up, but do we have time for one more question, or? Oh, I'm confused. Oh, these are all questions. I think we should prioritize people in the room, though, right? Oh, these are people in the room. Okay, cool. Which ones do I do? How do we need 5% growth? This is sustainable. Why don't we just reduce waste? Again, I think these things aren't mutually exclusive, right? I mean, we can have a longer debate about that, but wealthier societies are also more protective of the environment and have cleaner air. Yeah. No, it isn't. Yeah. I mean, we won't solve that entire debate, but I'm happy to stay around much longer to debate that. I like these debates, so I think we should have these debates. How to get to Susalu? I don't know about the next Susalu, all right, but I think it's going to happen sometime this year or early next year. Why should we give more power to VCs when their entire model is completely authoritarian? Yeah, I mean, as opposed to what, right? I mean, I think when I compare it in Honduras, for example, I'm going to make the first ever VC investment in a startup. The comparison is very predatory financing options. It's people like giving them like very little money for getting very high ownership shares. It's like very big banks trying to grab away ownership from founders, right? And it's very, very predatory. So when you compare it to that, I think VC can do a lot of good in the world, right? Is it the be-all, end-all? No. Happy to take criticism. Can you describe in detail how life is in Susalu or Prospera? What kind of population is there? Yeah, that's a great question. So very different. So Prospera is very local driven, right? So 60–70% of people in Prospera are Honduran, right? So about half of those are local islanders. It's an English-speaking island, right? And they're there as service workers, as cooks, as teachers. Some of them are setting up their own schools and doing their own businesses, which is really cool. The other half is educated Hondurans from the mainland, right? So they go to Prospera instead of the United States and search for opportunity because it offers comparable high wages and opportunity. And the other third is people like us in this room, or like me, right? So internationals, Balaji calls them crypto internationalists. I kind of like that word. I like frontier technologies, and I want to see where cool stuff is being built or done. And in Susalu is pretty much only the last one, right? So Susalu wasn't very local Montenegrin, but has been developing relations with the Montenegrin government. So Susalu is very much crypto internationalists like people here in this room. Yeah, sorry, time is over, but I hope to see you on Saturday or after this talk.